questions that came in on our Facebook this morning that I want to start with.
Sure.
Okay, so the first one, how do you teach my child with autism to start shopping for herself? She's almost 18 years old. They say I baby her too much. And of course, that's something we all struggle with, right? About when, what age do you release and how do you teach these skills and what day? I always want a manual that says, on the day that they turn 12 and 4 weeks, that's when you start teaching laundry.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? There is no manual. But so how and when 18-year-old with autism teaching the shopping for herself?
So, and this is one of those situations where I would have, 50 questions before I could really answer this correctly. But let's assume we're talking about grocery shopping. It doesn't really matter. It could be clothes shopping or whatever it is. But I think depending on, I assume your child is at the point where they are able to do independent skills or some independent skills, because there's a lot of different things involved in shopping for yourself. So one aspect of it is obviously picking the right things, which is really pretty easy because you can practice that at home by many different ways. One way is, for instance, go online with a shopping thing like Vons, for instance, online, and have her identify and pick the items.
Oh, that's a great idea.
There's a million ways you can do this. You just have a list depending on her abilities and what are the things you need right now, and then there's the main things that you buy every week, and then other things that you buy less regularly. So that's an easy portion of it, is just learning kind of the needs, the overall package. But then the other aspects of it are, paying for your things, getting the correct change back, putting all your things away correctly. So all of those different skills need to be, I guess, boxed and taught separately. Now, if it's shopping for something that involves a preference, like let's say clothing or something like that, then we're talking more about, and even with groceries, I guess, we're talking more about budgeting. So that is, you start out with a certain amount of money, let's say, and if you're really wanting to focus on budgeting, that's like a little bit of a bigger concept, because then you have to list out all the different expenses that she would have, and then she would have to be able to subtract and say, okay, this is how much I can spend on food, this is how much I can spend on other things. And then again, it's just practicing and itemizing. You just want to make sure you give her a lot of choices visually, let's say, either by written or pictures, and that she is able to pick from the choices and leave some behind. That tends to be kind of the harder thing. The correspondence to money.
I never had really thought about it before, but it's just tons of different skills.
It's a lot of different skills, and but it's a very easy thing. Once you have the individual skills, with our kids, Shannon, we even start much earlier, and we'll go to, let's say, the corner store or something, and give them a certain amount of money and have them pick snacks. Yeah. So it's an easier thing, but I think the hardest part that we've experienced is just understanding that, like, if the value of things.
Yes.
So let's say you wouldn't want to, typically you're not going to look for a skirt that's $200, that sort of thing. So that it just is a matter of budgeting, and that you can do with anything. With food or clothes or shoes or whatever it is, but this is all you have. How are you going to spend it? And that's just practice.
I remember at a certain age, they would take Jem to the store, and Target was a particularly good store because they tend to label the price on things quite clearly. Other stores maybe not as good, but underneath there's the barcode, and now there's no sticker on anything anymore. You have to look for the barcode underneath, which was fascinating to me because I hadn't noticed that.
Oh, really?
I really just hadn't noticed it in my life, that nothing has an actual price tag on it anymore. And so they would take him through the store, and they would find things that he liked, and they would just identify what the price was. And in particular, the lesson about when something says it's $18.99, is it really, do we think of it as $18 or do we think of it as $19? And then it was, maybe a couple of months later that Jem found a toy, and I said, well, how much? And I was actually videotaping with my phone, and I said, how much is it? And he said, oh, it's $7.99. But you know what that means, Mom. It's really $8. and I thought, there it is. He gets it. Because that in and of itself, I know adults that don't round up.
Well, so, and here's another really funny component of that, because when I first came to the States, the very first time, I think I was 6 or 7, something like that, and I remember going to a shop and getting something that was just a couple of cents less than the money I had, and then going to the front and to pay, and then it was more, because I didn't have the experience of taxing.
Yeah.
Right? And in the US, of course, everything is taxed.
Yes.
So I was like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. And I remember going back to my mom and saying, this was like $6, but at the cashier it was like 7 something.
Right.
You know? So that's kind of a confusing thing too. So when I talk about like sitting down and budgeting, you kind of need to teach that concept as well, which makes it a little bit harder.
Absolutely. So would you recommend taking it then each lesson at a time, or can you teach 2 or 3 at a time?
I mean, it just really depends on the child's skill level.
Okay.
There's a lot of applications now, if you have an iPhone, for instance, that you can just put the items in and it'll calculate the tax and the cost for you. But really, it's just a matter of being able to take, one sum of money and make a decision about what is best, how best to use that.
Yeah.
And I just think leftover, like saving, is the hardest concept for everyone.
Yeah.
It's not so much, okay, I have $10 and I can buy these 5 items. That's not that hard. It's pretty easy to teach that. And then with, every family is different. So what you buy at the grocery store is going to be quite different from someone else, and those are the things you just want to like go over and say, these are the things you always buy, these are the things you can pick one.
Right.
It's that type of thing. Yeah.
I think there are a lot of us that need that lesson. Maybe not just kids on the spectrum, but fascinating. And there are some shopping lessons that are in the skills program.
Yes, there are. And usually when you do something like this, like anything else with ABA, you want to start small, just like a couple of items, and then you will gradually expand it.
Okay, great. I'm going to go on to the next question on Facebook. Is it common for autistic children to hallucinate? My 4-year-old autistic daughter wakes up at night screaming that there are bees in her room. She can see them and points to them and becomes very, all in caps, upset. This goes on for hours. Hours is in all caps as well. And nothing can calm her. Even turning on the light, she can still, quote unquote, see them.
Wow. No, it's not common. It has actually, it's interesting because one of the differentiating diagnoses is there are no hallucinations or delusions. And people aren't very clear about this, but hallucinations are things you hear, delusions are things you see.
Really? I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, that's the technical.
Okay.
So if she really is, now you have to be sure that this is not just a kind of a method that she's learned to bring you into her room in the middle of the night. Because it's possible that it started with a dream, and from there on she realized, oh, if I have some sort of episode at night, then mom's going to come and join me. Otherwise, if she's really having delusions and hallucinations, then that you are now looking at the possibility of schizophrenia, because the only disorder that really does have hallucinations and delusions is schizophrenia. And it's very uncommon for a child to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, but the option exists, schizophrenia, childhood onset. And so, that would probably be important to determine. You'd have to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist who would evaluate and see if there are other symptoms of autism or there are other symptoms of schizophrenia. The difference is that moving forward with autism, the main treatment is to do behavioral interventions. With schizophrenia, main treatment is medication.
Okay.
So it would be kind of important. And one telling thing is, do you have people in your family other people who have schizophrenia or have been diagnosed with schizophrenia? But to answer that question, no, we don't have delusions and hallucinations in autism. But then again, as I said, it's hard to tell with kids with autism if they are just remembering perhaps a dream, or talking about something that happened once, and it sounds like they're hallucinating.
And I read back over it to see, and she doesn't say anything about her hearing it. There's only the saying about seeing it. Because it's a visual thing, I mean, this might be a strange question, but I have, like a lot of people, floaters in my eyes that sometimes, when they track different places, and I have on occasion before thought that it was a bug that I was seeing, and it's not, it's a floater. Is it possible that there could be a visual thing that's not?
It could, of course. It's it's very low likelihood with a child to have floaters, but of course it could be something with her vision, and it would be important to check that out as well. The thing about it that's unusual is that it happens only during the night.
Yeah. That's
if that's the case,
but yes, that's what it seems from what she said.
Right. So I would look into it. It's not something that you just write off and say, "Oh, this is part of the autism." No.
Okay. Great advice. Very interesting question. Okay, and the next one from a wonderful mom. I have 7 children.
Wow.
6 boys. I know.
God bless you.
I know. That's what we said this morning. Bless your heart. I have 7 children. 6 boys and 1 girl. 2 boys are on the spectrum. 1 is very possible, but not yet been tested. I also have a 6-year-old boy who I think is possibly on the way spectrum. My question is, what is the possibility of this being possible, as in having 4 out of 6 boys on the spectrum?
It's a low probability, but certainly possible. I do have other families. I think the most I have in one family is 5 kids.
Wow.
And so, it's a genetic predisposition, and obviously in a family, all of the kids are exposed pretty much to the same environmental factors. So there is a possibility, and you're going to have kids, if they are diagnosed, they're going to be all different levels. Like, I do have families who have multiple children, and one is extremely high functioning and one is very severely impacted. So it's possible, and of course, sometimes it works out okay, Shannon, because you learn very early on to do changes in the whole family system, like dietary changes and so on, that help everyone.
Right.
But obviously, the earlier you can find out and get a diagnosis and get intervention in place, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know of several families that have multiple children, and one mom in particular that recently, I don't want to misquote. I don't know whether she's got 2 boys already on the spectrum. I think it's 2 boys already on the spectrum, and her daughter, she believes, is about to get diagnosed. And she said, I was prepared for the second boy, but I wasn't prepared for this last one. It can be, I hear from the moms, it can be like a death as each child gets diagnosed, and feeling like it's just a car accident that you keep watching over and over again. And of course, we all sent love and support and said, this isn't what you want to hear right now, but thank God you know what to do. Thank God you are already that many steps ahead.
That's true.
That, and I think everybody has their own beliefs in what, I happen to believe that God only gives you what you can handle. And I don't know if that's true, but it gets me through some days.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, it's pretty amazing and just astonishing what this family is going through.
Can't imagine.
I encourage this family to apply for a grant at ACT Today, Autism Care and Treatment Today. We do our best to fundraise and help families, and when you write in, we always prioritize families with more than 1 child, so you'll definitely get some help from us. So
great. We still have another question from Facebook that I want to get to, but I think we should take a short break, and we'll be right back with more Ask Dr. Doreen. Keep your questions coming in. Welcome back to Ask Dr. Doreen. We have in the studio with us right now Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, a true expert in the field of autism, visionary in the field of autism. Because I think you are you know so much, but you're also so forward thinking. I think you see things on the horizon that don't occur to the rest of us, which is, I'm so glad that you're in charge.
Thank you. I just think my life has been all about autism for such a long time that, you just live that way, thinking about what are the next things we need for our kids. And
well, you have a brilliant mind, and you're so good with our children, and I appreciate you greatly. We have another question that came in on our Facebook this morning. Is it possible to teach an autistic child to swim? My little guy is 10 years old, and I keep a constant eye on him, but the drownings of all the autistic kids in the news lately, they've wandered off and gotten away from their parents. It's heartbreaking to me. I'd like to think my son is high enough functioning to avoid water, but those parents probably did too. And she makes a sad face. She says, one in Florida a few weeks ago and one in Missouri just the other day. Why is it always drowning? So a bunch of different questions in there. We've had multiple drownings, and that it's not an isolated year for that. I mean, we have this every year.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
It's really horrible. It really is unbelievably horrible. And, you know, why drowning? Drowning is one of the top reasons that kids have, you know, accidents or pass away, just in the general population as well. I would strongly suggest that you get your child swimming. And of course, it's possible. It's not only possible, the majority, in fact, I don't even know of a child, I'm just thinking in my mind, who didn't absolutely love swimming. The kids really, really enjoy it because I think because of the pressure and the sensory aspect of being surrounded by water. They just love it. And yeah, we teach our kids very early. I mean, you can teach a child any age, and it's really the same process as teaching a typically developing child. It just may take a little bit longer, or you might separate the steps a little bit more. But I would really suggest that you do teach your child to swim. It'll be a safety issue that you don't have to worry about forever.
There are even we were scheduled to have a swimming expert on the show for Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy, because this is a topic that Nancy and I have just been despondent over the loss of these children. But unfortunately, they have to reschedule with us today. But there are services out there that teach babies how to swim. I'm sure you've seen on YouTube the videos of they teach them how to swim with their shoes on, with their clothes on, how to roll over onto their back, because let's face it, that children who fall into pools or fall into streams don't usually fall in their bathing suits.
That's true.
And really important that all of our kids get good swimming lessons, whatever age. But since we're talking about this, I want to talk a little bit about the children who elope. Because in all of these cases, they were children that eloped first and then drown.
And sometimes I think it also happens during the night, because you know, a lot of our kids have problems sleeping. So you know, eloping is one of the things we work on very early on, and it's a very easy thing to teach a child not to elope, not to run away from parents. We do it mostly in public places, because that's another danger, is kids running in the middle of the street. But you know, until you teach your child swimming, then make sure you have either a cover or a very secure fence, or at the very minimum, there are these floating things that will sound an alarm if there's movement in the pool. So you know, it has happened quite a few times. I was on the phone with a friend of mine who is a physician, actually, and she was asking for help because her child is in a classroom where one of these children drowned, you know, passed away. And I was giving her some advice about how to help the other kids with the whole grief concept, but it's terrible. It's really terrible.
It's devastating. And I know there were a lot of people, there was a public outcry because there was one story in particular, one writer who after Michaela Lynch died, the little girl in Clear Lake, California, had said, you know, why weren't the parents watching her better? And the whole autism community got together for one day, and they called it blogging support, and put out words of support and wisdom and hope for those parents, and reminding everybody that you can't watch a child 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that can't be the expectation ever.
That's right. And I think sometimes people don't really know unless they have a child or they're very familiar with autism. We're not talking about an infant. We're talking about, you know, a 9-year-old, 10-year-old who's very active, moving around. It really isn't possible to keep your eye on a child constantly. I mean, you go to the bathroom and they're unsafe.
Exactly.
So, as much of safety skills as can be taught should be. As you know, a couple of our research team are very involved with safety, and they're really into teaching all the safety skills, even things like recognizing who's a stranger and all of that. So it's very important.
Yeah, and we certainly have made the case here at Autism Live that for people to get support, and if you've got an eloper, or that you can apply for grants at Act Today, because they've got some help and support, but you shouldn't just, I think a lot of times people just accept and go, well, my child runs off and there's nothing that can be done about that because of autism. That's not the case, correct?
No, not at all. I mean, our kids learn that very fast, not running away. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up because, we do have a whole subsection of grants just for safety at Act Today. So,
Yeah. But back to the original question, it's so important that we teach all of our kids how to swim.
Absolutely. And it's not a difficult task to teach. I mean, as I said, a lot of the kids actually, it comes very naturally to them. They love it so much.
Yeah. And there usually a community will have either somebody who's very good at teaching swimming and is willing to take on a child that has special needs. And I know in my community they offer one-on-one lessons for half the price that they would offer for group lessons for kids who have special needs.
Oh, that's great.
And it's worth it to ask.
Right.
I didn't know that, and somebody told me about it, and they said, oh yeah, all you have to do is ask, and they're happy to do that because they feel very passionately that all kids should be kept safe. So
absolutely.
Ask.
And even if the child doesn't actually learn, great swimming strokes, it's just important for them to learn how to tread water, how to float.
Right.
And that's very easy to teach a child. So.
And I would encourage you, check out on YouTube those baby videos. They show taking babies, itty bitty little babies, and they toss them in the pool in all their clothes, and they roll over on their backs, and then they float over to the edge of the pool and can get out. It's amazing. It's like life-changing kinds of stuff. Okay, we've had people writing about Baby Einstein before, and we have another question about Baby Einstein. How can I motivate a typically developing sibling to play with a sibling who is nonverbal and only wants to watch Baby Einstein? The siblings are 8 and 9. Oh, wow. And we see that a lot of our kids, we've heard over and over here that our kids are fascinated with water, that they want to play in the water constantly, and that there are a lot of kids who get stuck developmentally on they love the Baby Einstein.
Really interesting. I'm trying to remember the Baby Einstein stuff. If I remember correctly, it's just like pictures that are labeled and there's music in the background.
And there's puppets and toys, and they play classical music usually in the background, and they'll show numbers or letters or whatever. So they're hearing the classical music, and it's a lot of puppets coming out and doing things, not so much talking.
Right. Well, so I mean, in this scenario, there's actually a lot of different areas that I want to give feedback. One is, so clearly the child with autism here is very interested in whatever that scenario is. So they're interested in perhaps it's important to have like that kind of musical background. So you could play music in the background and make sure the TV's off, obviously, so that you're kind of producing that type of an environment for your child. Perhaps you will get them some cards, stimulus cards with very bright pictures on them. And that might be interesting enough for the child to want to interact with someone else. Now, the older sibling, I assume older or younger, the other sibling, of course, we want our kids to play with each other, and that's a good thing. But to begin with, it's a little bit hard for a child with autism to actually play and interact. You have to teach them how to play and how to use toys appropriately, how to take turns, all these different things. And I wouldn't really, if I was to try to teach a child how to play, I wouldn't really start with stimulus cards. I'd start with some sort of musical toy or any toy that produces a reaction when you press a button, for instance. There's a cause effect.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I hate to say this, and I'm guessing as a mom, you just want the kids to engage each other. Yeah. But sometimes you don't want to see the sibling, the other child, as a therapist, because the other child is a child too. And I hesitate to encourage you to, at this point, try to have the typically developing child be the one that's responsible for playing with the other child. It's sort of like, just at this point let the typically developing child do their own thing, rather than encourage them or get them too much into teaching play. Perhaps an adult or a therapist should teach the child with autism some appropriate play skills first, which are perhaps, so you'd want to teach games and toy play and functional pretend play and constructive play and all these different things, and make sure your child's interested in doing that first, and then try to engage with a peer.
Okay. So, I hear this a lot from the things that you say, that we want to front load them for the success first. Is that like a shortened way of?
Well, yeah.
Because no matter what the skill is, we want to make sure that before we put them in the circumstance where that they've had enough rehearsal for it.
Right,
is that accurate?
Right. Absolutely. And specifically with play, what we try to do is we often will teach play with an adult first, and then teach play with one other child, and then teach play with a group of children. So, and I become very protective of the siblings, just
which
because
is so sweet.
Well,
I think that's
the siblings
appropriate.
It's hard enough, 100% of everybody's attention is on the child with autism, and the siblings can enjoy coming into it, certainly. I remember when Jana, one of my little girls, her sisters were very involved in stuff, but you want to make sure that it's fun for the sibling. We
haven't had enough opportunity to talk to siblings here on the show, and I think we should do a special feature on that.
Absolutely,
because
it's a big deal.
I know I've had the pleasure of talking to several siblings that have grown up, and the one thing that I say to parents when they express concern about the siblings is they grow up to be the most incredible, compassionate, well-rounded people. That doesn't mean it's not hard for them while they're going through it, but having seen what the end product is across the board.
Absolutely.
Nick Yates' sister is incredibly articulate, compassionate, kind, considerate. And she's by no means the only one that I've met I've met Jana, at least one of Jana's sisters.
Sure.
Incredible human beings.
You go through life a little bit differently, right? You learn to not have all the attention.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, somebody wants to know, is scripting movies loudly normal for a 4-year-old?
Normal. Let's say I have a lot of 4-year-olds who do that.
Okay.
And I would say it's interesting, actually, when you looked at scripting movies, because I think some of our kids try to interact that way. Like, it is language that they learn from a movie, and then some of my kids will just repeat it and they'll laugh, like maybe they're recalling something and they're having fun with it. Other kids actually use the language in context, which is sort of interesting. Like, when something in real life happens, they'll throw out some language that they heard on a video, and it actually works, to throw it out at that point. We know it's scripted, but it sort of works. They apply it appropriately. It's typical, like anything else, it is a common thing with a lot of our kids, but like anything else, you want to make sure that it doesn't take over the child's normal social communication, right? So it's like a good example to contrast this to would be just any typically developing teenage boy who spends 10 hours a day on a computer will not learn appropriate social behavior because their computer time takes over, right? And so the same thing with scripting. When you're scripting, you're kind of in a fantasy world, and being able to differentiate that is difficult. And that's something, so we early on will kind of stop scripting and try to replace it with appropriate language. And another comment on scripting is that sometimes it is completely appropriate to use the language they've heard on TV, but our children don't learn to introduce it appropriately.
Okay.
So in other words, they'll say something like, Bunny is jumping under whatever, right? And in order to make that appropriate, all they would have to say is, remember that film, or remember that cartoon where blah, 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 and then they can share it with someone else.
Right.
And that aspect of sharing, recalling it together, sharing it together, we do all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, people do that all the time. It's just our kids kind of don't know how to introduce it.
Okay, so getting that sort of, first part of the sentence to reference it.
Right.
Yeah, I Nancy and I have talked about that before, that sometimes that's the toughie with our boys.
Yeah.
That, Jem will, he'll say something to me, and it's clear that he's been having a conversation with me in his head. He's just 3 sentences further into it than I am.
Right, and often you just have to kind of go like,
yeah.
I don't know what that meant.
Right,
exactly. You gotta go back and clear it up.
Okay. We have a couple of questions about methylcobalamin, the methyl B12. People wanting to know, one question wanting to know, are there any disadvantage? Another person who says whether the use of it has any strong disadvantages. So is that outside your area?
No, I mean, disadvantages like anything else. You don't really want to be giving your child a shot a few times a week unless they need it.
Right.
So you would need to do lab tests and identify if the child actually is a low methylator. Otherwise, you don't want to just start doing it because someone else is.
Yeah.
So other than that, though, no, the kids who benefit from it, and you're not doing anything harmful.
And I just, on a personal note, I will say that I was one of those people who, it took me years. People talked to me and said, you should get him tested, you should check out his methylation process and all of that. And I moved slower than molasses in January, going uphill when it comes to giving things, right? I just am extremely cautious, and it took me forever. I think it was 5 years before I said, okay, we will do, and that was even after we'd had him tested, and they said, yes, he would benefit from it. It just still took me time because I was injecting my child. And I'd heard amazing stories from families who said, oh, this just made a huge, huge difference, right? But it took about 2 to 3 weeks before we saw any difference. And my son, who is a lot of times very guilty of what we were just talking about, not telling you what the reference for something is. So about 3 weeks into the shots, he came in, woke us up in our bedroom, and he said, Mom, he said, remember when we were at Disneyland the other day and we went into the Blue Sky cellar and we saw the thing where they talked about how when they were researching how to do Cars Land, they went to Route 66, and he held up a little video, and it was Valiant. He said, I think the next thing they should do is Valiant, and they should go to London to research it. And both my husband and I sat straight up in bed and said, oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's
because
awesome.
Any other time he would have come into the bedroom and said, Mom, you know that place, that thing?
Yeah.
I think they should do that, but they should go this place instead.
Right.
And I would have been lost.
Right.
But to have heard everything that was going on in his mind and the references for it was
awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah, and that's a really good point too, Shannon. Is sometimes our kids are so excited that they want to like blurt something out. And we really are. I mean, I don't even know if any of our answers helped this particular parent, because there's such a huge array of scripting. Like honestly, sometimes you have kids who will say nothing else.
Yeah.
They're non-vocal other than the scripts that they memorize and repeat. So it's very different how you deal with it at any given point.
And as far as the methylcobalamin disadvantages, I don't know in terms of everybody else, but I was warned of the fact that he may do some chewing, and he did. We had to get some jewelry because he was having some biting issues that went away, but we did do a bitey necklace. And I was also warned, because my child is very yeast reactive, that it might kick up his yeast a little bit, and it did. And we had to sort of change things and get a little bit, we had loosened up on, he's always GFCF, but we had loosened up on some other things that he was doing, and we had to tighten up on those as well.
And did you see a pretty significant change after?
I would say, and I've shared this with you before, that I think we still need to go back in and do another yeast thing, because I think we just have been barely keeping not a good enough control over things.
Yeah, yeast tends to be really a factor that stays pretty chronic, and it just keeps coming back, and a lot of our kids suffer from that.
Yeah. But I can see a difference in my child when he has his methyl B12 and when he doesn't.
Amazing.
And now he is old enough and verbal enough that he will sometimes voice to me, because it's supposed to be every third night for us, and that's really hard for me. You can't set that on a phone.
Yeah.
And like I could set every other night on a phone, but I can't set every third night on a phone. So some days I mess up,
Yeah.
and we just don't get the shot done. And we do it while he's awake. And it's not his favorite thing to get the shot.
Sure.
I'll be honest with you. But so I might miss a day or two, and then he'll be trying to tell me something. He'll go, I want to say, and he'll say, I'm frustrated, I can't get the words out. And I know I have days like that.
Sure.
But to see that he doesn't have those days when if it's the day after the shot, it's not like that for him.
Right. I hear you.
So there has been a big benefit for him, but he got tested and he it was shown that he needed it.
Right.
So
Good.
But and the biting and the yeast, I would trade those for him to be able to express himself.
Absolutely, but I mean, you have to also remember that the whole concept of these shots with the methyl B12 is very important just for detoxification.
Yes.
Like, you're giving your child this shot because they're low methylator, which means they're exposed to the same things we are, but they're not detoxifying as rapidly.
I'm glad you said that because I don't think of it that way. I think of it as him being able to speak and not why he's able to speak because he, as they refer to it a lot of times, is taking out the trash.
Yes.
Giving his body a way to take out the trash.
Cleaning up, absolutely.
Fascinating. So hopefully, if they can be talking to their doctor about whether their child is a methylcobalamin, whether they're low methylator.
Low methylator, yeah.
Okay. Fabulous. Okay, we had another question up here that I wanted to scroll up to. I have a 20-year-old friend with autism. He loves to play on the computer, but is unable to use his fingers to type. Is there software that allows you to communicate while typing?
I'm not sure I understand that.
So he
communicates while typing.
I don't know whether they're asking for, are there computer programs that will help you to type or computer programs that help you communicate without typing? I'm not sure.
Right, I can't. Well, there's a lot of different programs for typing. And there's just various keyboard programs and so on. And we use the same ones that we have with our typical kids, with our children on the spectrum, and they work fine because they actually give you a keyboard and they gradually teach each one. So that's fine. But and then there are programs that are for communication, like Proloquo and so on. So there are. And these days, to be able to answer that question, I think if the question is without typing, all the with the iPads, you just have to touch. And you don't have to type anymore, so now you're touching icons. So yes, and that would be Proloquo is one. There's a lot now. There's several other ones now that are just for communication with icons. So I don't know, maybe that answers the question.
Yeah, and I'm not sure with the wording either, and we're not using last names here, but this was from Dylan. So Dylan, if you want to write in and be a little bit more specific with us, we'll be happy to finish answering the question, because I'm not sure that I know exactly what you're asking. But Dylan, write back to us. Okay, we should take another short break, and then we'll come back and do another segment before we finish the show. So stick with us more. Ask Dr. Doreen after these messages. Welcome back to Ask Dr. Doreen. Our very special guest in the studio with us right now is Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh. Now, several of you have written in and asked for the DSM-5 criteria, and we were so lucky a couple of weeks ago to have Dr. Granpeesheh go through the entire criteria. She shared her slides with us. You can watch that show. It's on our YouTube channel, and we also on our Facebook channel are featuring all of the slides that Dr. Granpeesheh did, where she broke down for you, so you have access to all of that, and you don't have to wait for us. And we won't take time to go over that again because it's there for you. It's on our YouTube page. You can go to autism. You go to youtube.com/autismlive, and you can search for DSM-5, and you can also look for Ask Dr. Doreen. It was 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to continue on with a question that we're featuring on the page right now. Would it be possible to know how you organize a week of activities for people with autism and mentally retarded? Thank you very much for sharing your experience or advising where I can find more details. And that was sent in to us by a doctor. I'm not going to share their name.
Well, I'm not sure what they mean by organize, but the first thing that comes to my mind is we do this a lot with some of our kids, where we will actually take out a calendar or a big schedule. We'll produce one, and sort of like a wall calendar, and then you have activities on there, and the activities are like on cards, and they're Velcroed or something, and you can move them around so that you can sort of pick the week and pack it. So that makes the whole thing visual. If it's a child who's not able to read, obviously you want to have icons that represent the activities on the cards. But what makes the whole thing kind of difficult is that our kids don't understand the concept of time, and that's a little bit harder to teach. It's not the same as teaching time on a watch. It's more about the passage of time, and that's very, very hard. That's why actually one of the early programs that I had written a long time ago had to do with times of the day, kind of understanding the morning, afternoon, just trying to break the day up. But what we do now with our kids is, like, there are certain set things in everybody's day, and they're like, for instance, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And our kids do develop a sense of when it's lunchtime or when it's going to be dinner time. There's other things that are also set activities, like, for instance, a parent comes home from work. And even though it's not connected to a specific time, like at 5 p.m. or at 6 p.m., our kids kind of have a sense of when it's going to happen. So we put those set activities on the calendar just so that our child kind of gets an idea of, dinner is after daddy comes home, or these programs are we're going to be working on, or swimming is the thing that I do right before lunch, or, so it kind of helps our child organize their whole week that way.
And what's interesting to me, and we've heard this from lots of different people in lots of different ways, but what really made sense to me as a parent when they were talking about scheduling and giving a visual schedule to my son, because it seemed like a whole lot of work to me, and I thought, then we're going to pigeonhole the day, nothing organic will happen, we'll be boring, we'll be passé, right? And one of the therapists said to me, how do you like it when you're driving a car and somebody else is holding the directions and they won't give you the directions until the very last minute?
Right.
Don't you feel a sense of anxiety and like, give me the directions, I'd like to know where I'm going.
Where I'm going, yeah.
And I think that we all do, and that made total sense with me. And I also, recently somebody said to me, all of our kids, whether they're on the spectrum or not, they crave some sort of structure.
Order, you're right.
And if we don't give it to them, we're doing a disservice to them.
Well, and often our kids will actually, tend to have more behaviors when they don't know what's coming. So it's really a very calming thing.
Yeah.
The example I use is, let's say you go to work and you don't know when you're going to get to go home.
Right.
You don't know when work's over.
Yeah.
It could be over at 2 or 5 or whatever, you don't know. And so if going home after work is the reward that you're waiting for, you're just never going to know when it's coming.
Right.
So with our kids, because half the stuff we have them do is not necessarily rewarding, it's work. It's, it's like going to school or learning this, learning that, and so on. It's really important to do a visual because it allows them to kind of see the rewards that are in between as well, and actually for you to see as a parent that, hey, maybe I need to increase my reward periods because I'm putting so much demand on my child. I was just doing this for a 20-year-old the other day. I was putting a calendar together and I was realizing, like, this guy is such an awesome character that he does so much for very little reward, and his rewards are like maybe his meal periods. Yeah. And so it's a good idea to have a visual schedule because it helps you balance everything out. You realize that you need to have more rewarding activities in between the tasks that are harder. For the child or individual, it becomes much more just calming to see what's next. And also the reason I put it on Velcro is because sometimes I want to give my child or adult the opportunity to pick.
Yeah.
Because if you give them like 5 or 6 cards and you say we have to do all of them today, well, they get the idea and then they'll put it in an order that they want to do it.
That makes it easier for them.
Yeah, like a lot of times our kids will like load up first on the rewards.
Yeah.
But hey, they actually will get through the rest of the tasks too because they got to choose.
Amazing.
It's an important thing.
Absolutely amazing. And so, in terms of kind coming up with activities that would be friendly for kids who are on the spectrum and individuals who are developmentally delayed. What kinds of activities do you recommend?
Oh, well, that's really easy to answer because every child has different reinforcers. So one child might find it very rewarding to take a bath, another one will hate it.
Yeah.
So as I've always said with behavioral interventions, you have absolutely no power unless you know what your child's rewards are. So we will do not only a reinforcement inventory at the very beginning, which is just a massive list of all the possible rewards that we pick for the child with the parents, but we'll often do sort of a forced choice inventory where you give the child 3 or 4 things that are currently present, and they get to choose what they want to work for. And that just makes the whole thing different. So, visually, from rewards could be anything. They could be, I want a half an hour to go to my room and listen to music and do something that normally would be considered self-stimulatory. That's a reward. That's called the Premack principle. Yeah. Or they could be food items, or they could be activities, or they could be, a massage, or they could be getting less of a certain type of program. It really varies.
This brought up something for me. My personal question. We've recently.
Excuse me.
No problem. Jem's been in a phase recently where if I give him 2 preferred activities to choose between, and I say it's your choice. What do you want to do? Do you want to do this or do you want to do this? He has anxiety about it. He goes, I don't know which to choose.
Right.
I don't know. I'm going to make a wrong choice.
Right.
And I'm always saying to him, there is no wrong choice. The other one will still be available some other time, but right now you can do this or this. Any words of wisdom for me about how to make that easier?
Absolutely terrific, actually. And that's just choosing choices and stuff. No, there's no way you're going to make it. He's just going to learn. I mean, one way to make it easier is to alternate the strength of the 2 so they're not equal strength.
Okay.
Another way actually would be to give him a daily schedule because he'll be able to pick the one now knowing that the other one's later in the day.
Okay.
So he'll know that he's going to get both of them. He's just going to get one now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great because, summer's coming up and I, like I said before, I was reluctant to do the visual schedule before, but I shouldn't be because I know it works.
No, it's terrific. I've done it with my kids all the time. I mean, it's just terrific.
Fabulous. Okay. So, and hopefully we have enough time to cover this one. How do autistic children take tests? Is there some type of routine that they go through? And thank you ahead of it. I think this is a great question because I am still confused with all of the tests that they give. People talk about the ADOS and they talk about the...
Is that what we're talking about here?
Well, actually it could be, how do they test in school? Like, how do
I just don't know, right?
Yeah, I don't know either.
We'll try to hit on both, I guess.
Okay, great.
Testing in school, there's accommodations, right? So you will specifically request for accommodation so that they will give you more time. The child will have different types of questions, or will have, just a broken down test, or do it over multiple days, or a variety of different things that they can accommodate your child with, if that's the question. I don't know. In terms of assessments, there's a ton of tests. The ADOS is going to be extinct now that we have DSM-5.
Really?
So
something else will take its place?
Well, they'll have to do a new ADOS.
Okay.
Right, so, and I'm pretty sure they've been working on it probably.
Okay.
They just have to validate it and all that sort of stuff, so it takes a while. But there are a series of tests that are just for diagnostic purposes. The ADOS is one. There's others. ADIR is sort of a parent interview version of the ADOS, and there's a lot. Depending on the child's age, there's various other ones, which will all now have to be changed, right?
Because and so if you walk in today and say, I'm getting my child diagnosed today,
right,
you have a new criteria, but you don't have a new test. What happens?
That's correct. Well, that's why you need a clinician who's experienced. I won't generally test my kids for diagnosis anyway.
Okay.
So if you're not experienced, you will want to depend on testing. For me, I depend on spending 2 hours with the child.
Okay.
So an experienced clinician doesn't need to test. Testing is just, so those are the diagnostic. And then when we're looking at other tests, obviously there's a whole array of cognitive tests, IQ tests, a whole array. The Stanford Binet, the Wechsler test, and they change by age level. And then there's a series of tests just for language functioning.
Yes,
there's a lot. There's the Vineland is an adaptive test, and that's one that will probably never change. The Vineland's been around for ages, and it's a pretty amazing questionnaire. It's more of a questionnaire. And there's a version for parents and a version for teachers and other caregivers. And it looks at adaptive functioning. So it'll look at a variety of different things within the scope of how does this individual function in the world. And it's like the only test I know that goes from age like 0 to 99 or something. It's got a huge, broad range of age. And it's just a series of questions in daily living skills, communication, social behavior, and so on. Then there's individual tests for each of those areas.
Yeah.
So there's language testing and there's social skills testing and all these different things. And then there's developmental tests, which are usually pretty limited. Skills, we're in the process of validating right now. And the skills index, I think, is more of a developmental, because they'll ask you a lot of questions about your child's functioning at certain ages, and those are very useful, I think, in terms of being able to identify like what my child still needs to learn. So yeah, there's a ton of different tests. Now, another aspect of this question might be, how does the child tend to do? Usually, obviously, anyone, not just kids with autism, will not necessarily show their true ability because a test is given on one day. Imagine if you have a day like I'm having today with my allergies and you go in for testing. You're not going to do as well as another day where you're not having allergies, right? Or you're not rested, or you get irritated with the examiner, or whatever it is. There's a billion things that will influence how you do that day, and unfortunately that's just the way it is. If you have your child tested and you truly believe it's not valid, then you should go and have another test done, or repeated. Often though, I'll be honest with you, these tests are, it's like that you'll have, I don't know, 100, 200 items on the test, and not every item affects the overall score. So you might retest and you might feel that the child did much better, but you'll end up having a similar score because they're standardized scores, so it translates into almost the similar thing.
One of the things that parents say, and I know I've experienced this too, when we get the questionnaire and we have to fill it out, that I hate it in terms of, I feel like it's how I am today. That I'm going to fill it out and I'm either going to say he's better than he is and he's not going to get treatment that he needs, or I'm going to say that he's worse than he is because he had a bad day, or I had a bad day, and that we're in some way going to skew the results.
Yes, it's hard. It is very hard, and that's a very interesting perspective actually you just gave me. I think when we were writing the skills index, we had two ways to deal with that, because it's kind of intense for a parent.
It is.
What we did is we said, does your child most of the time do this or not? And even if you weren't sure about that, then we still have sort of a pool of questions that you can actually probe, and you just put them away because you just don't know the answer to that.
What I like about the skills one, the difference for the skills one, and I took the skills assessment in its entirety twice.
Oh my God.
Because I did it when it was in beta, when it was on paper.
Yes.
Or that was probably before beta. So I did it twice. I don't know that there are any other people that can claim that they did it twice. So I want a badge for that. But
you deserve one.
But in any case, what I liked about it was that once I answered the questions, it showed me right away. I got to see, okay, so this is where he is on the graph.
Right.
And I got that was my reinforcement. When I take them at school and I fill them out and I send them in, later on I get back a score that I can't link up to what my answer was, so that I don't have a way to gauge, was that because I was having a bad day, or was that because I was hoping he was doing better than he was?
Right, and that's actually not ethical. Like when you get a test done at school, for instance, a school psychologist will give you something to fill out. They're supposed to sit with you and explain the whole thing. They're not supposed to send it to you. They're supposed to sit down with you and explain what each score means. But nobody.
That might be in the middle of the IEP when I'm like, we're in hour 4, can I just go?
Yeah, I hear you. And also, so that's another important thing. Schools aren't allowed to do certain types of tests, so their tests will be slightly different ones than, like, they won't be doing IQ tests, for instance.
Amazing.